What if your mechanic is keeping the simplest fix a secret from you? We'll reveal how one common sensor could be the source of your car's misfire and why replacing it could save you hundreds. Don't fall for costly repairs until you've checked this critical part. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. What if that engine misfire your mechanic warned you about doesn't actually mean the end of the world, or your wallet? Misfires are often blamed on catastrophic engine problems, leaving many drivers bracing themselves for sky-high repair bills. But why is this the common assumption? The answer lies partly in the way engine issues are communicated, both by mechanics and by the industry at large. The average car owner is often told that misfires are a red flag for engine failure, which sounds intimidating enough to convince anyone that something massive and expensive must be wrong. However, the auto repair industry has a transparency problem. Car issues can be complex, certainly, but they aren't always as severe as they're made out to be. Misfires are a perfect example of this. They can stem from a variety of causes, ranging from something as minor as a sensor issue to something as significant as internal engine damage. Unfortunately, uninformed car owners are rarely given the full picture. Instead, some mechanics may jump to the most alarming and most expensive conclusion without thoroughly diagnosing the actual problem. It gets trickier when you account for how a single faulty component can mimic the signs of major damage. Take the mass airflow sensor, or MAF sensor, as an example. This piece is small, relatively affordable, and plays a key role in determining how much air enters your engine, which the car's computer then uses to adjust fuel delivery. When the sensor malfunctions, the air-fuel ratio can get out of balance, causing issues like rough idling, poor fuel efficiency, and yes, the dreaded misfire. Here's where it gets frustrating. A bad MAF sensor can trigger symptoms so similar to severe mechanical failures that some mechanics automatically assume the worst. Imagine this. A customer brings their car into a shop because it's misfiring. The mechanic hears the uneven sound of the engine, checks for symptoms like poor acceleration, and concludes it's time for an engine rebuild without even running a full diagnostic. A job like that could set the car owner back thousands of dollars, all while the real problem, their failing MAF sensor, sits untouched under the hood, a fix that costs a fraction of the price. The problem isn't limited to one or two isolated examples either. Many drivers have found themselves quoted for unnecessary repairs like replacing fuel injectors or ignition coils, when in reality, their engine's performance could have been restored with just an $80 sensor swap. Mechanics don't always maliciously upsell customers. Sometimes they genuinely misdiagnose the problem due to rushed evaluations. But the end result for the car owner is the same: wasted money. Understanding how this happens starts with knowing how significant that little MAF sensor really is. When it works as intended, the sensor ensures the precise balance of air and fuel that your engine needs to run smoothly. When it starts to fail, that balance goes out of sync, throwing off everything from performance to fuel economy. The symptoms can look so intimidating that even capable mechanics might overlook the culprit. Without a proper diagnostic process, the repair suggestion often defaults to replace everything and hope it works, leaving the customer with a hefty bill. This is why learning about components like the MAF sensor can be a game changer for car owners. Realizing how a misunderstood sensor can masquerade as a major mechanical problem gives you the power to ask better questions and protect your wallet. But how do mechanics figure out that a MAF sensor is the issue, or fail to? In the next part of the video, we'll walk through the diagnostic process and how the tools in a repair shop can expose the truth about your car's problems, one data point at a time. Ever wondered what's really happening when your mechanic plugs that little device into your car? That moment can feel like a mystery, but it's actually an essential step in diagnosing misfires and other engine issues. The tool they're using is called a scan tool, and it works by connecting directly to your car's onboard diagnostic system, often referred to as OBD2. The system keeps track of signals from sensors throughout the engine, recording data and identifying problems that aren't immediately obvious during a visual inspection. Essentially, the scan tool translates all of that information into readable codes or real-time data that tells mechanics what's going on under the hood. What makes the scan tool such a powerful diagnostic instrument is its ability to zero in on the small details of how your engine is functioning. It provides everything from misfire codes, specific to individual cylinders, to real-time fuel trim data. With fuel trims, for instance, mechanics can see how much your engine's computer is adjusting the amount of fuel it delivers. If those adjustments show major deviations, something like a faulty sensor or a vacuum leak could be the cause. Similarly, if the scan tool detects misfires coming from just one cylinder, this can save a ton of time by directing attention to that specific area rather than randomly checking every component. You'd think this process would be a standard part of diagnosing issues like misfires, but here's the shocking part. Some repair shops skip it altogether. Instead, they might try the trial and error approach, replacing parts based on assumptions rather than evidence. For example, a shop might replace spark plugs, ignition coils, or even full fuel injector systems when, in reality, the real cause of the misfire might have been identified in seconds with a proper scan. Let's break this process down. Imagine a mechanic plugs in the scan tool and pulls a code like P0303, which indicates a misfire in cylinder 3. The tool shows them additional data, like fuel trim swinging high, which means the engine's computer is adding extra fuel to correct an imbalance. This points toward a possible air-fuel mixture problem. Now the mechanic can start testing related components. One of these components is the MAF sensor, a critical piece we talked about earlier. The scan tool helps them monitor the sensor's outputs to check if it's underperforming. If the readings seem off or inconsistent for your car's conditions, the problem is almost always linked directly to the sensor. There's an even simpler test a mechanic might perform. They might temporarily unplug the MAF sensor and let the engine run without it. If the misfire disappears once the sensor is disconnected, that's a clear indicator of an issue. Why does this work? Well, when disconnected, the engine's computer switches to a default air-fuel ratio instead of relying on the faulty inputs from the MAF sensor. It's a fast, straightforward check that confirms whether or not the sensor is to blame. But here's where transparency makes all the difference. A trustworthy mechanic doesn't just run the scan and call it a day. They'll explain what these codes and readings mean in plain terms. They'll show you why they think the MAF sensor, or any other component, is causing the misfire. This not only builds trust, but also gives you the power to understand whether their conclusions make sense. On the flip side, if a mechanic simply says, "You need new spark plugs," without showing you codes or discussing the diagnosis, that can be a red flag. What's especially encouraging is that anyone, not just experienced mechanics, can recognize these patterns and questions. For example, if your repair shop mentions a misfire but doesn't bring up specific diagnostic steps or data, you now know to dig deeper and press for more clarity. Simply knowing that scan tools can pinpoint issues instead of guessing gives you leverage to demand better service. Ultimately, it comes down to this. Mechanics who take the time to use a scan tool properly and explain their findings to you aren't just diagnosing your car's problem. They're proving their honesty. Transparency and a systematic approach are the real markers of a professional. Once the source of the problem, like a faulty MAF sensor, is found, the fix itself is often surprisingly simple. Sometimes the simplest solution is the one no one tells you about. A faulty mass airflow sensor, often overlooked, proves how many misfires don't demand expensive repairs. The mechanic's open diagnostic process in our example shows how straightforward fixes can save you hundreds when paired with